Pawan, we are live now. And hello, friends. How are you? I hope you all are good. And I welcome you all in our today's webinar. And our today's topic is on e-invoicing under GST. Since you all are aware that government has done some changes in the e-invoicing under GST, and it is applicable from 1st of October. So therefore, we thought to conduct a session on that. And we are glad that CA Pawan Tejwani from Mumbai is with us, who will take our today's session, and he will explain us all the provisions of e-invoicing under GST. It is very much important for all of us to understand to whom e-invoicing under GST is applicable, which it is applicable to which corporates, what is the procedure. Everything will be discussed in detail in our today's webinar. Since it was applicable from 1st of October, so you must take care of the provisions in your company for your clients, because it is very much relevant for all of you. Before proceeding further, let me give you the introduction of CA Pawan Tejwani ji. He's a chartered accountant qualified from 2017 batch, and he loves writing and has taken various sessions on the GST as well, and various forums. He has already delivered session on the GST. So we are glad that today he is with us and taking the session on invoicing under GST on our platform. And I welcome our moderator of the session, C. Amrish Agarwal ji as well. He will be the moderator of our session. Whatever queries you will have, friends, queries will be discussed and taken in our today's session, and probably we will might take queries at the end of the session, or as per the Pawanji's requirement, if he wants to take in between the query. Pawanji, you can ask the participants your queries as well. Now we will start the session. And just one more information I want to share with all of you. We are conducting one session on TCS provisions under income tax act as well. We are conducting one session on TCS provisions under income tax act as well. There has been recent change in the TCS provisions as well. So that session will be held on Tuesday. So I request you kindly join that session as well. Now I'll request C. Pawan Tejwani to proceed further and start our today's session. Over to you, Pawanji.
So thank you, Deepak sir, for a lovely introduction and for giving me this platform to speak on this aspect of e-invoicing and GST. So, and this is a really beautiful platform where probably charters and other professionals can put forth their thoughts with regards to the recent amendments and the recent changes, be it GST, be it income tax, or various other fees that involve professionals. So it is a really good platform, and the audience can gain a pretty decent insight on various aspects. Uh, so today I'll be speaking on e-invoicing under GST. So e-invoicing under GST was it's been around for quite some time now. Although it has come to India right now in 2020, it has been around for almost like 2 decades. Earlier on, it was started, in Latin America, Chile, Brazil, Mexico. These three countries were at the forefront where they started e-invoicing way back in 2003, 2004. So Chile, Brazil, and Mexico were at the forefront. And there are various other Latin American countries like Argentina and so on that have also taken up this initiative of e-invoicing. E-invoicing Chile, Brazil, and Mexico, these three countries, have been carrying out e-invoicing for all the possible commercial transactions. However, the other Latin American countries are still, carrying out e-invoicing on a B2G basis. B2G would mean any supply made to any governmental organization. So, barring Chile, Mexico, and Brazil, all the other Latin American countries are carrying out e-invoicing on a B2G basis. Then coming on to the European countries, countries like Spain, Italy, Norway, Switzerland, etc., have taken up this initiative of e-invoicing. E-invoicing there is still not that mandatory, so probably it is still being carried out on a B2G basis, business to governmental organization. Italy, however, is at the forefront, where Italy has started taking up e-invoicing on a very serious basis, and has started taking e-invoices on for all the possible commercial transactions. So Italy is at the forefront. Even Switzerland, for that matter, is going to make e-invoicing compulsory for all the possible commercial transactions in the near future. Uh, Switzerland has been doing e-invoicing for quite some time, like 2 decades now. So, although e-invoicing was never compulsory, it'll be taking up e-invoicing on a very serious basis for all the possible commercial transactions. Now that we know about Latin America, we have a gist of European countries. Let us jump to Asian countries. So Asian countries have not really taken up e-invoicing on a very serious basis. However, there are trial rounds going up in China, Singapore, and Singapore will be taking it on a very serious basis in the near future. Even Taiwan, for that matter, Taiwan has taken up e-invoicing since 2016, and with effect from Jan 2021, Taiwan would be taking up e-invoicing on a very serious basis, and will be using it for all the possible commercial transactions. So Taiwan is a country, it's a very small country, but it takes things very seriously, and it is at the forefront of quite some things. Even, during COVID, uh, Taiwan was at the forefront, and probably it was one of those countries which was COVID free for quite some time, and it took all the possible measures to cut down COVID in a very beautiful way. So Taiwan, although being a small country, is at the forefront of quite some things. Um then coming to India. So now in 2020, here we are. It's been like 2 3 days since e-invoicing has started, 1st October 2020, and e-invoicing basically helps in proper tax compliance and accountability. So e-invoicing is necessary. It is the need of the hour. E-invoicing in India, it was proposed way back in December 2019, probably in the finance budget, if I'm not wrong, and it was to start with effect from 1st April 2020. However, due to the outbreak of COVID, it got shifted to 1st October 2020. When it was to start from 1st April 2020, it was to be implemented for all the entities having a turnover in excess of 100 crores. Uh, However, with effect from due to the outbreak of COVID, government gave the relaxation, and now it is being implemented for all the entities having a turnover in excess of 500 crores. So here we are at the outset, and e-invoicing has begun. So let's have a look. So e-invoicing under GST. Now that I've given you a very decent picture about the global background of e-invoicing, and about the various countries all over the world, as well as in India when it was to start and how it has started. So let's have a look at what exactly is e-invoicing. So e-invoicing is basically a system where I give the invoice details to a governmental portal. For now, the governmental portal is www.einvoicing1.gst.gov.in. So that is the site where all the invoice details would be going for the notified persons, as in the persons who are to carry out e-invoicing. So such people will send their invoice details to the governmental portal, which is also known as the Invoice Registration Portal. I would be referring it to as IRP. So these invoice details would be sent to the IRP, and the IRP would be carrying out back-end validations. And once the successful validation is done, an IRN would be provided. So for now, we can understand that this is the process of e-invoicing. We'll get into the specifics and the mechanism at a later stage. But for now, we can take this into mind that we can take this into consideration that giving invoice details to the IRP and getting the IRN is what e-invoicing is. IRN as well as the QR code, two things. So basically, sending invoice details to the IRP and the IRP carrying out validations at the back end. And on successful validation, an IRN and a QR code will be provided. So for now, we can understand that this is the process of e-invoicing. So this is the process of e-invoicing, and e-invoicing will help generate an e-invoice, which can be provided to the recipient. So for now, we can have a brief picture that this is e-invoicing. We can get into the specifics and the mechanism, as the slides pass. So e-invoicing is a system where the registered supplier generates the invoices ERP system or manually and sends it across to the invoice registration portal, which further generates an invoice registration number. In other words, it is submission of documents like GST tax invoice, debit notes, credit notes to a government notified portal in a requisite format and obtaining a reference number thereon. So, e-invoicing means the invoice shall be prepared after obtaining an IRN by uploading specified particulars on the notified invoice registration portal. So this is basically, I gave a gist of what e-invoicing is. However, we need to keep in mind that the details sent to the government portal, that is the IRP, is not responsible for generating an invoice. All it does is it carries out a backend validation and provides an IRN and a QR code. However, it is not a portal which generates e-invoice, so that is something that we have to keep in mind. It is not a portal for generating e-invoice. It is a portal for carrying out backend validation and providing and on successful validation, providing an IRN and a QR code. So that is what an IRP will be doing. So now that we know what e-invoicing is, uh, we should be knowing why e-invoicing has come into picture. But then the second thought that comes to my mind is why e-invoicing? We already have so many compliances, right? On a monthly basis, we keep filing GSTR1, GSTR3B. Now we have GST audit. The due date has been extended for that. We have GST annual return. For the month of September, there are so many compliances like come for Rule 42, 43 for FI 1920. We had to issue credit notes had to be issued max by 30th September. Any rectification to be carried out in GSTR1, this is the last chance. Rule 36.4 has to be complied with. So there are various compliances that we already have. So why has the government introduced another compliance? Why e-invoicing? GST was supposed to be easy, right? Good and simple tax. That's what was portrayed to us, right? So let me bring the picture that e-invoicing should ease down your compliance in a way, because as I said, the basic mechanism would be my invoice details would be going to the IRP, that is the invoice registration portal. The invoice registration portal would also be interconnected with the GST portal. So in a way, all my details that would go to the IRP would in turn go to the GST portal as well, and accordingly, my GSTR1, the B2B criteria of my GSTR1 can be filled. So that is a very big plus. So in a way, probably my compliance wouldn't increase. As of now, the picture is such that the compliance would decrease because my as the IRP is interconnected with the GST portal. So in a way, the compliance would take place on its own. So yes, in a way, compliance burden may go down. So yes, that is why e-invoicing is necessary, and it is the need of the hour, as well as it will provide details to the government, on a real-time basis. So that is a very big plus. So now let us have a look at why e-invoicing is to be introduced. So why e-invoicing? I gave you all a brief picture that e-invoicing would help simplify reporting in the GST returns. As I said, the invoice details would go to the IRP, and IRP is in turn connected with the GST portal. So as it is connected to the GST portal, all my details that would be, put forward to the IRP, it will directly be auto-populated in my GSTR1. So yes, my B2B would in turn be populated, auto-populated, and it would, decrease my time of you know complying with GSTR1. So that is the first point. Help improve communication and exchange of documents between B2B. So how will this happen? So for e-invoicing to come into picture, there are various ERPs. Every supplier has a different ERP, be it SAP, be it Tally, etc. So all these ERPs, in a way, have to follow a particular schema, a particular syntax. So schema would mean the format basically. So once this format is followed, this format has been provided by the government for e-invoicing. The format has been provided by the government. So this format has to be complied with by every supplier who is required to comply with e-invoicing. So once every supplier complies with this particular format, particular schema, particular syntax. So, it will be machine readable for the IRP as well as the other systems, the other ERPs that are dealing with, the supplier. So the recipient, the ERP at the recipient's end can also probably, read the invoice that has been provided by the SAP, as the syntax would be a common one. It will be at a level playing field, so basically thus improving the communication and the exchange of documents between B2B. For an example, the ERP at the supplier's end is a SAP, while the ERP at the recipient's end is a basic Tally. So the basic documents that are provided by the SAP are not basically readable by the Tally. You'll have to manually enter the details. However, with e-invoicing coming into picture, it is going to be pretty easy because the schema that is being followed by the supplier, it is machine readable by the IRP as well, and the e-invoicing would help ensure that the QR code and the IRN are into picture. So once the QR code has been provided to the recipient can probably check the QR code, check the existence of the supplier, and also various other details provided by the supplier. So things would get easier. There would be an easy compliance between easy communication and easy exchange of documents between a SAP at the suppliers end and between a Tally at the recipient end. And invoice registration portal, the government portal, even that can probably easily read the details, as well as it will improve the communication between two different ERPs. So hence help improve the communication and exchange of documents between B2B. The second point is very much interlinked with the third point. Hence help simplify exchange of documents between suppliers and buyers. And lastly, as we know that the IRP is interconnected with the GST portal, and accordingly the supplier's GSTR1 will be auto-populated. So assuming that GSTR1 will be auto-populated and it will go on the correct basis, details would be available for the recipient. For the recipient, once GSTR1 has been filed correctly, the GSTR2A will be auto-populated, and once GSTR2A is populated, the recipient can avail credit on that basis. So, as the IRP and the GST portal are interconnected, and we can assume that the GSTR1 can be easily filed and in a smooth manner, and the details provided in GSTR1 are correct to an extent. So, accordingly, GSTR2A, the details would be available in GSTR2A as soon as the return is filed. So there are very less chances of entries being missed out in GSTR1. Now that it will be auto populated on a B2B basis, so there are very less chances that entries will be missed out, and accordingly GSTR1 would be correct for the B2B sector, and GSTR2A will also reflect that picture, and the ITC can be availed by the recipient. Hence, hence the last point being, help reduce the submission of multiple statements and details by the taxpayers and help the purchasers get ITC easily. Yes, the ITC would be available in an easier manner as due to the auto population of GSTR1. Help reduce submission of multiple statements and details by the taxpayers. As I said that all the ERPs would be on a level playing field now. So, earlier on, some things were, SAP, the details provided by an SAP to the recipient having tally. So, some details would not be provided or some details would be extra. There would be issues with, at the recipient's end, and the recipient can probably, ask for more details, some other statements as well. But now, as the QR code will be provided, it can be easily checked by the recipient on the site as well as by downloading a application, and the QR code can be checked, and various other details can be reflected on the QR code, and the authenticity for that can also be checked, as well as various details would perfect details would be provided. So hence, reduce the submission of multiple statements and details by the taxpayer. So now we have a brief picture of what e-invoicing is, why e-invoicing has been introduced. So we should also be knowing that for whom e-invoicing would be applicable. We although have a very brief idea, right? All entities having turnover in excess of 500 crores. But let's get into a deeper picture as to what the applicability is. So coming to the applicability, it will be applicable. It has been applicable, in fact, from 1st October 2020. So all the taxpayers having aggregate turnover in FY 2017-18, 18-19, or 19-20 in excess of 500 crores, excess of 500 crores will always be based on the PAN. Will have to comply with this initiative of e-invoicing. So the government has come up with a clarification where 500 crores. How do we calculate that 500 crores? So everyone was in a fix. Some people were saying it is to be done taking into consideration the turnover of the previous year, that is FY 1920. So there was a bit of an ambiguity in that. Now, which has been clarified by the government that turnover for FY 2017-18 or FY 18-19 or FY 19-20, any of these 3 years, if my turnover is in excess of 500 crores, e-invoicing would accordingly be applicable for me. So if suppose in FY 2017-18 my turnover has hit 600 crores, however for 18-19 as well as 19-20 it is way below 500 crores, still I will have to comply with e-invoicing. So it is not a cumulative criteria, as in my turnover should be in excess of 500 crores in FY 17-18, 18-19 as well as 19-20. No, it's not a cumulative criteria. It's a or criteria where basically my turnover is in excess of 500 crores in any of these 3 years. So that has to be kept in mind. Uh, and yeah, e-invoicing, the government also clarified the fact that e-invoicing would be applicable for on a B2B basis, as well as supplies made to exports. Supplies made to exports. Yeah, yeah, correct. So on a B2B basis as well as exports, these two criterias will involve e-invoicing. So we'll also get into a deeper picture as to what aggregate turnover is. So we should also be knowing, know what aggregate turnover is. We'll see that in the next slide. Coming to non-applicability, SEZ units, banking, including financial institutions and NBFCs and insurance companies, etc. So this is a very brief picture that I've given of non-applicability. I will be, discussing it in detail in the coming slides. So this is with regards to applicability. Now let us have a look at what exactly aggregate turnover is. So aggregate turnover would include my all my supplies basically, my exempt supplies if I have any, my exports that I've made, any interstate supplies that I have made, all of this made on a PAN basis. So that is what aggregate turnover is. However, any purchase I made make on an RCM basis, that is not to be considered, and that has also been clarified. So let us have a look at what aggregate turnover is now. So in terms of Section 26 of CGST Act 2017, aggregate turnover means the aggregate value of all taxable supplies, excluding the value of inward supplies on which tax is payable by a person on reverse charge basis. It will include my exempt supplies, exports of goods or services or both, my interstate supplies, under the same PAN. That is what is important. Having the same PAN number to be computed on an all India basis. However, it excludes central tax, state tax, union territory tax, integrated tax, and cess. So I'll give you an example. So suppose uh, suppose there is an entity which has a turnover of 700 crores. However, the entity has a banking unit and it has a trading unit. So the banking unit has a turnover of suppose 600 crores, while the trading unit has a turnover of only 100 crores. So now, in this case, as we saw in the previous slide, that banking companies are exempt from the compliance of e-invoicing. So the banking unit will not have to comply with e-invoicing. However, the trading unit, in spite of having a turnover of only 100 crores, but the PAN turnover, as we saw, the turnover of the PAN, the entity's turnover was 700 crores. As the PAN turnover is in excess of 500 crores, which is 700 crores, it will still, the trading unit will still have to comply with e-invoicing, in spite of having a turnover in a way below 500 crores. So this is what has to be kept in mind, that the PAN turnover has to be seen, that which is in excess of five. If it's in excess of 500 crores, that is when you have to take a call accordingly. So this is a brief picture of what aggregate turnover is. Now let us have a look at the non-applicability. Let us study on non-applicability in depth. So there are various businesses that have been exempt from complying with e-invoicing. So firstly, it is SEZ, that is Special Economic Zone. So any SEZ as well as a free trade zone. Free trade zone is also a special economic zone. So if these entities are exempt from complying with e-invoicing. However, a SEZ developer has not been exempt from e-invoicing. So one will have to take care that if he or she, if it's a SEZ developer, then it'll have to comply with e-invoicing. Secondly, every insurer or banking company or a financial institution, including a non-banking financial company. So this is a very big relief. There are quite some banking companies, financial institutions, insurers that have turnover way in excess of 500 crores. So a big relief for them. Goods transport agencies supplying services in relation to transportation of goods by road in a goods carriage. Suppliers of passenger transportation service, suppliers of services by way of admission to exhibition or cinematograph films in multiplex screens. And we also have to keep in mind that e-invoicing is currently, for the timing, it is just for B2B and exports. However, it is not applicable for B2C currently. So that has to be kept in mind. So now we have a brief idea of the applicability of e-invoicing as well as the non-applicability of e-invoicing. So let's get into a bit of depth in e-invoicing. So a small gist of e-invoicing and GST, the legal provisions. So in terms of Rule 48.4 of CGST Rules 2017, notified registered persons are required to prepare invoice by uploading invoice particulars in GST INV 01 on IRP and thus obtain the IRN. So this is the mechanism. This rule states the mechanism of e-invoicing. Coming to the next rule, that is Rule 48.5. Invoice issued in any other manner other than the one mentioned in the above rule, that is Rule 48.4, which was earlier mentioned right now, would not be considered as a valid invoice. So, post implementation of e-invoicing, an e-invoice has to be compulsorily being issued by the notified registered persons. So only then, the recipient that is receiving the invoice, if an e-invoice is provided to him, to the recipient, only then will it that particular e-invoice will be treated as a valid invoice. A normal invoice will not be treated as a valid invoice. So this can have an implication on availability of credit, which I'll be dealing with in a later part. Then coming to the third legal provision. So in terms of Rule 48.6 of CGST Rules 2017, where e-invoicing is applicable, issuing of e-invoice in duplicate or triplicate is not required. So earlier on, invoices currently, as per the rules, invoices are to be issued uh, in duplicate and triplicate. So one is for the supplier, one is for the recipient, and one is for a triplicate is for basically the person carrying the goods. So which is not this is not applicable as of now. E-invoicing will only be applicable, as in only one e-invoice has to be issued. So that compliance has been done away with. So yeah, so this is a brief about the legal provisions. So coming to the advantages of e-invoicing, we have already seen quite some advantages in why e-invoicing was to be introduced. So this will give a very holistic picture of all the advantages of e-invoicing. So as I already mentioned that the invoice registration portal will be interconnected with the GST portal, and accordingly my GSTR1 will be auto-populated. So yes, it will ensure auto-population of GSTR1. The other plus point is that it will also ensure auto population of an e-way bill. So that is a very big plus. So entities dealing with goods uh, can have auto population of GSTR1 as well as auto population of e-way bill. Improve payment cycle. So as we know that there are quite some entities that follow this practice where only when they see an entry in GSTR2A, only when the recipient sees the entry in GSTR2A and they see that the credit is available to them, that is when they make the payment to the supplier. There are quite some entities that follow this cycle. So this will probably ease down that cycle, and there'll be improvement in the payment cycle, because as we all know that the entities following e-invoicing, the GSTR1 would be auto-populated. GSTR1 would be auto-populated. There is a very high chance that no entry will be missed out, and since it is auto-populated, the GSTR, once it is filed, GSTR2A will also be auto-populated, and the entry would be in turn visible to the recipient in GSTR2A. He can avail the credit as well as make the payment. So in a way, it will ease down the payment cycle, improve it. So, and coming to the next point, that is standardization across all industries. So, standardization, as I said, a particular schema will be followed by all the ERPs, all the suppliers having various ERPs. So, standardization will be followed, and a particular schema has to be followed by all the suppliers, which will ensure that the e-invoice is machine readable by the IRP as well as it is readable by the recipient. So it will ensure standardization across all industries. And as I said that GSTR 2A would be the ITC details would be easily available in GSTR 2A, since the GSTR 1 B2B has been correctly filed, and there very less chance of missing out entries in the B2B scheme of GSTR 1. Hence GSTR 2A would be auto populated on the reasonably correct basis, and accordingly ITC would be available to the recipient. So the fifth point being ITC would be available to the buyer almost on a real-time basis in the near future. Uh, so it will also reduce availment of fake credit, and ultimately it will improve efficiency and information availability. As we all know, it will ensure standardization, reduce fake credit, auto population of GSTR1. So it will probably improve the efficiency and the information availability. So these are the advantages of e-invoicing. So this is just a very brief picture of what was happening pre-invoicing and what is happening currently post e-invoicing. So pre-invoicing, there was no sort of compliance required. As there was no sort of compliance required, so all that was needed to be done was to generate an invoice, and once the invoice is generated, we can shoot the invoice to the recipient through an email or through courier. So that was pre-invoicing, no sort of compliance required. So basically, let's have a look at that. Pre-invoicing, prior to introduction of e-invoicing, an invoice would be prepared manually or by the ERP system further such invoice would be sent across to the purchaser. So there was no sort of compliance required. So post e-invoicing, a bit of change has happened where a certain mechanism has come into picture where we have to send the invoice details to the IRP. The IRP will do backend validation, provide us with an IR and a QR code, and then the QR code, and then probably a normal invoice and an e-invoice can be sent across to the recipient. So a bit of compliance has increased, but which is if an API has been taken by an entity, so it will probably smoothen that process. So we'll come to the picture of API in the later on stage. So with effect from October 1, every company to whom e-invoicing would be applicable would have to send the invoice firstly to the IRP system, where such a system will digitally sign, provide a unique IRN, and add a QR code. Further, the invoice can be issued to the purchaser along with the QR code. So this is what the extra part has come into picture. So yeah, this is list of pre-invoicing and post-invoicing. So we should also know that what documents are covered in e-invoicing, right? We know that what e-invoicing is, why it has come into the picture, what the advantages of e-invoicing. Now that we know that we have a picture of what pre-invoicing was happening, post e-invoicing what was happening, and we should also be knowing what sort of documents are covered in e-invoicing. So currently, all the tax invoices, GST credit notes, GST debit notes have to be, taken into consideration for e-invoicing. However, if I am a dealer in exempt supplies, that is when e-invoicing exempt supplies nil rated. That is when e-invoicing would not come into the picture. So basically, documents not covered under e-invoicing are bill of supply, delivery challan, self invoice. So even if I'm a recipient of where I'm paying taxes on reverse charge basis and generating a self invoice. Even in those cases, I'm not required to generate an e invoice. So all that we have to remember is a tax invoice and a GST and GST credit notes, debit notes would involve e invoicing. However, if I'm supplying exempt supplies, so I will be issuing a bill of supply, and in that case, e invoicing would not be applicable. So coming to the next slide, mechanism. I've given you guys a very brief picture as to what e-invoicing is, as in uh, reiterating it, that my invoice details will be going to the IRP, that is the invoice registration portal. What the invoice registration portal will, probably carry out the backend validations, and once the backend validations are successful, it will be providing us the IRN and a QR code. So this is a very brief mechanism of what e-invoicing is. Now we'll come to the actual mechanism, a very in-depth mechanism. So firstly, it involves sending, as we all know, it involves sending the invoice details to the IRP. The IRP will carry out the backend validations, and once the validation is done, it will provide us an IRN and a QR code. We all know till this extent we are aware of the mechanism. So how will the probably IRN QR code be provided to us? The IRN and the QR code will be provided in a JSON form to us. So once this JSON has been provided to us, it is necessary to convert this JSON to, because JSON is not readable by a human. So it will have to be converted to a PDF, which can be probably read by a human, and that PDF can be pushed off and sent to my recipient. It can be sent to a recipient via mail or via courier. So we all know that the IRN will be provided to us and the QR code will be provided to us. It will be provided in JSON form. So the JSON has to be converted to a PDF, and we can push off that to the PDF to the recipient. Along, we can push off the e-invoice as well as the normal invoice. Both of it can be pushed off to the recipient in that manner. So this is a very wholesome picture and a holistic picture, holistic mechanism as to how e-invoicing has been carrying out. So the invoice details go to IRP, validation is done, IRN and QR code are provided in the JSON form. JSON has been converted to a PDF, and once the QR code is affixed, it can be sent to the customer. So this is a basic mechanism and the in-depth mechanism of how e-invoicing is to be carried out. Uh, so this is a detailed workflow being given at gstn.org.in. Uh, so where the seller would be uploading e-invoice details containing the GSTIN, invoice number, date, value, etc., and to the IRP. The IRP signs the invoice, adds a QR code to the JSON, sends back signed JSON, as I said, to the buyer, sends the invoice to the GST system. So once it is sent to the GST system, it updates the outward and the inward supplies for buyer and seller. Now has a unique invoice with a unique number, and the buyer can also view the ITC related to the invoice in his GSTR 2A. So that is a very big plus. So the seller also receives the digitally signed JSON of invoice that contains the QR code. So this is a very this gives a complete picture of the process and the flow. So we can move on to the next slide. So now that we know that what e-invoicing is, why it has been carried out, uh, the advantages of it, and the applicability, the non-applicability, and the documents required for e-invoicing. We should also learn that how e-invoicing will e-invoice and e-invoice, how will it be generated. So there are various modes of generation of an e-invoice. Offline facility bulk upload tool. So this is an upload tool which has been provided by our government, where it is in various forms like Form A, Form B, Form C, Form D. So Form A is a very basic upload tool, while Form B, Form C, Form D are a more complex one with various other fields as well. So offline facility bulk upload tool can be used. I'll be showing the process of it in the coming slide. And there is direct API generation. So API is nothing but application process interface. So if an entity has its own application for e-invoicing, it can probably use this method of direct API generation. But this is not usually the case. Coming to the third method, API generation through GSP. So this is application process interface generation through GSP. So there are various GSPs in the market, that provide. So they basically provide their tool, which in helps in the process of e-invoicing. So there are various CA firms that provide their own tool which helps in generation of e-invoices, and there are various GST sites also which provide their tool, and in turn an e-invoice can be generated. So the third method is the most common method which is being used currently, and it is an easier method, and the time involved in the third method is quite less. It's not that time consuming as compared to the other methods. And it is being widely followed. API generation through GSP. The last one being web-based, mobile app-based modes will also be provided in the near future. So government is also in the you know working phase to provide web-based and mobile app-based modes, which will ease down the process of generation of an e-invoice. It will be quite easy to generate an e-invoice. So these are the four methods. We can go ahead and probably have a look at the bulk upload system. So for a bulk upload system, in a bulk upload tool, firstly, I'll have to log into einvoice1.gst.gov.in. So once I've logged into that, uh, coming to the first tube, so basically I'll have to go to help, and in tools I can see bulk generation tool. And as I said, coming to the second box, bulk generation tools involve various tools like Form A, Form B, Form C, and Form D. So Form A is a very basic tool which can generate e-invoice. And coming to Form B, Form C, Form D, those are a bit on the having a more number of line items and a little more complex procedure. So once I upload details, so bulk generation, as the name suggests, various invoice details can be entered in this bulk generation tool in one go. So once the details are being put on this bulk generation tool, the bulk generation tool can in turn generate a JSON. So once that JSON is being generated, I can probably again, I can log in on this site einvoice1.gst.gov.in. So once I get a JSON from this bulk generation tool, this tool, bulk generation tool, can be taken down, can be downloaded, and can be used on your can be used offline as well. So once you have a JSON generated offline, you'll have to log in to einvoice1.gst.gov.in. So once I've logged in, I can go to the e-invoice sector, and the e-invoice sector has a bulk uploading option. So once I press into that, I can go to the invoice bulk upload, and I'll upload my JSON that has been generated. So once I upload the JSON, coming to the next slide, so once I've uploaded the JSON here, as you can see, I have an option of downloading the Excel file. So this Excel will have the IRN, as well as it will also have my QR code. So the Excel can be downloaded, as well as my signed JSON can be downloaded. So this signed JSON will have a lot of IRNs, a lot of QR codes. So this JSON can be converted to a PDF, and then this PDF can be sent across to the recipient. However, this bulk upload process is a bit of a complex process, while the API process is a much simplified process where the tool will do the rest. All we have to do is, give the invoice details to it, or even some tools pull off the invoice details. If it is linked with the ERP, it can pull off the details from the ERP invoice details and directly provide an IRN and a QR code. So that is a very easier method compared to this. So coming to the schema, what is it and why is it required? So schema is nothing but a format. It is a standard format that is being given by the government, so that every supplier takes into consideration certain fields, and there are various mandatory fields and there are various optional fields. So this schema will ensure this format, the syntax, all of it is are being properly followed by the supplier, and it is being followed by the supplier, and it will be machine readable for the IRP as well as the recipient. So schema is nothing but a format which has to be incorporated by every ERP which is generating an e-invoice. So let's have a look at what exactly is schema and why is it even required. So schema is nothing but the standard format for the e-invoice, notified as Form GST INV1. Schema is a standard format which has to be incorporated in the ERP system so that the e-invoice generated is readable by the other ERP of the purchaser. It also ensures readable to the IRP. Schema ensures that the e-invoice is machine readable. So it is nothing but a format or a syntax which has to be followed by every supplier of e-invoice. So it is machine readable by the IRP as well as at the recipient's end. So this is necessary to be followed by every supplier, every notified person who has to issue an e-invoice. So we can, have a very detailed discussion of what exactly IRN is, why is it required to be generated. So what exactly is IRN? So IRN is a 64 character unique reference number. So why 64 digits? It's such a big number, right? 64 digits. So this involves quite some things. It will be involving the GSTN of the purchaser, the financial year, the document type, that is whether it's a tax invoice, credit note, debit note, and some other details. So it takes into picture quite some things: the GSTN, the financial year, the document type, and other things. So that is why it makes it a very big, unique 64-digit number. The point that we need to keep in mind is that it is not compulsory to report the IRN in an e-invoice, as such an IRN is already embedded in the QR code. So the QR code consists of a lot of things, one of which is an IRN, and hence an IRN is not required to be separately given out in an e-invoice. So we can probably say it is not mandatory to provide an IRN as it is already embedded in the QR code. We'll see the consistency of QR code in the coming slides. Uh, so the next point is an IRN is generated by the IRP. It is quite possible that the IRP can reject the invoice number as such an invoice already exists in the GST portal, and accordingly IRP would not generate an IRN. So there can be various instances where a duplicate invoice number has been provided to the IRP, and the IRP will not, in such a case, successfully validate the particular invoice details, and it will not be providing the IRN in the QR code. So one has to keep in mind that no duplicate invoices are given out to the IRP. Uh, it can happen very rarely, to be honest. Very rare cases when by chance, by mistake, a duplicate invoice number has been given out. So that is not the case. Uh, there are cases where basically the IRP can reject and not successfully carry out the backend validations. So, on the other hand, when there is a successful validation, the IRP system will in turn successfully validate it and provide us an IRN and a QR code in a JSON format. So the last point is, on the other hand, on successful validation by the IRP, a signed JSON would be generated by the IRP along with IRN and QR code. This slide gives us a wholesome picture of what exactly an IRN does, when it can go wrong, when it can go right, what cases it can be not successful, in what cases it can be successful. Uh, so basically, if I by chance give a duplicate invoice, that is when successful validation cannot happen. Uh, so coming to the next slide, once I have given out, once I have generated the IRN, I can the next process is to probably process print my invoice and give out my invoice. So once the IRP is successfully validated the invoice and provides the signed JSON, the JSON can be converted to PDF and it can be printed. So, as we all know, it is not compulsory to report the IRN in an e-invoice, as such an IRN is already embedded in the QR code. QR code can be extracted from the JSON and placed on the invoice before printing, or you can also, what practically is happening, practically people are basically sending the invoice as well as the e-invoice. So, a copy of both are being sent out. So, that is what generally is, as of now, is the industry practice. So, that can be followed. So once once the entire mechanism is done, so I've been provided with the JSON, I can convert the JSON into a PDF, and I can send that PDF along with my normal invoice to the recipient, and he can probably take the credit and also check the validity of that particular invoice. He can scan the QR code. Sorry, he can scan the QR code and get the various details, and come to know whether the invoice has been successfully validated or not. So what are the contents of a QR code? So QR code consists of GST of a supplier, GST of a recipient. The invoice number is there, the date of generation of invoice is there, invoice value is there, number of line items. So if a person is dealing in stationery, so he can have an eraser, a pencil, pens, etc. And there are various HSN codes and the unique IRN as well, the invoice reference number. So we can see that a total of 7-8 items are being provided by the QR code, and it is more than self-sufficient. Hence, IRN is not required to be actually given out because the IRN is itself embedded in the QR code. So these are the contents of QR code. Coming to the next slide, verification of invoice. So for self-satisfaction, once the IRN has been generated and I have converted the JSON into the PDF, I can myself, before giving out to my recipient, just for a double check basis, I can myself check the QR code by, probably there is a there is a facility available on this website, as well as there is a facility available on your mobile, as in various Androids, and Android can be used for searching the QR code, because uh, the app has been basically provided. The search app has been provided by the government. The government has also come up with an app, as well as a web-based facility where the QR code can be checked. So with the help of a dedicated search app to search the QR code, also a search facility is also being provided to search the IRN on the GST portal. So we have two things that we can do to search the QR code. We can either download the search app, as well as we can check it on the website. So there are two things, two aspects that we can probably check the QR code. QR code contains the GSTN of the supplier and the recipient, invoice value, number, date of generation, SSN, unique IRN. The point to be kept in mind is that dynamic QR code is not required for a B2B transaction. So I'll come into, I'll at a later stage, I'll be discussing what a dynamic QR code is. So more than one QR code can also be used by a supplier. However, the QR code that is being provided by the IRP, that is the mandatory QR code which has to be given out to the recipient. However, if the supplier wants another QR code, he can also take into consideration that QR code and also affix that QR code on the invoice. So one invoice can have more than one QR codes. However, the QR code generated by the IRP is one that is mandated by law. Having more than one is on it depends on the supplier, the discretion of the supplier. So more than one QR code can be used by the supplier. However, the one generated by the IRP is compulsory, while the others can be used as required by the supplier at the discretion of the supplier. So after verification, the signed JSON provided by the IRP can be converted to PDF and can be sent across to the buyer via mail. So this verification can be done at the supplier's end, as well as at the recipient's end, and they can know the authenticity of the invoice. So I've tried to compile quite some frequently asked questions, FAQs given out by the government, which can have a practical implication. Uh, the first one being exemption from e-invoicing is with respect to business or entity. So the exemption from e-invoicing is with respect to business and not for an entity, because as I said, if suppose an entity is having a turnover of 700 crores, while that entity has two units, a business, a banking entity, a banking unit, or a trading unit. So in such a case, if the banking unit has a turnover of 600 crores, while the trading unit has a turnover of only 100 crores, the banking unit is exempted from e-invoicing, while the trading unit will not be exempted from e-invoicing, as the trading unit, as the turnover on a PAN basis is in excess of 500 crores, the turnover on a PAN basis is 700 crores. Uh, so that keeping that in mind, the trading unit will still have to carry out e-invoicing. So hence the exemption from e-invoicing, as I mentioned, is with respect to only a business. So a banking business is different and a trading business is different. So the exemption is only with respect to the business. Various businesses like banking, insurance, as we saw in the earlier slides, banking, insurance, financial institutions, goods transport agencies, passenger transport services, etc., SEZ, etc., are these businesses are exempted from e-invoicing. So coming to the next question, is e-invoicing applicable to invoices issued by ISD? So no, e-invoicing is not applicable to invoices issued by ISD. However, if a notified registered person, a person who requires to generate an e-invoice, if such a person issues an invoice to an ISD, then in that case an e-invoice would be required. So basically, invoice issued to an ISD would require an e-invoice. However, an invoice issued by ISD would not require an e-invoice. So it can be kept into mind in such a manner. Uh, Coming to the next question, will the IRP validate the original invoice details of the credit debit note entered? How will the credit debit notes whose original invoice has been issued prior to October 1 be treated? So the IRP system will not be validating any sort of original invoice details. So uh, so that has been done away with. Even recently, even the GST portal, a particular relaxation has been given where credit notes have and the debit notes, they don't have to be linked with your the original invoice number and the original invoice date. So these details, original invoice number and original invoice date, currently have not, are not to be provided in the GST portal as well while filing GSTR1. So we have a similar, mechanism here. The IRP would not be validating any credit debit notes, as in the whatever details are provided to the IRP, it will be validating those. However, validation with respects to the original invoice details would not be done by the IRP. So the IRP would not be validating any credit debit notes. Validation of credit debit notes would take place at the GST portal once the data has been shared by the IRP with the GST portal. But that also has been done away with, as I mentioned. The GST portal, GSTR1, currently does not require credit and debit notes to be linked with the original invoice number, original invoice date. So that has been, a relaxation has been provided on the GST portal as well. Coming to the next question, what is to be done for invoices which have non-GST as well as GST items in the same invoice? For example, a hotel issuing food bill and alcohol bill. So currently, so for an example, a hotel invoice, giving out an invoice having a food bill as well as a alcohol bill. So a food bill involves GST, while an alcohol bill does not involve GST, as alcohol is outside the purview of GST. So uh, so the schema has been made by the government as such, where only the items attracting GST can be taken into consideration at the IRP. So the hotel will have to ensure that two different invoices are being made, one for the food, which is having GST, and one for the alcohol, which is a non-GST item. So currently, so only this particular invoice which has food and which attracts GST will be, these details will be given to the IRP, and the IRP will be validating it. However, the details of the invoice having alcohol would not be given to the IRP. So the answer being, since the schema currently does not have any facility to include non-GST items for the time being, separate invoices are to be issued for GST items as well as non-GST items, where only the invoice pertaining to GST items is to be issued to the IRP. Uh, Coming to the next question, so this is a very important one. So if an IRN is cancelled due to wrong invoice details being given to the IRP, then what is the next step? Or can the same invoice be provided to the IRP if respective IRN is cancelled? So there can be various instances where an invoice is being cancelled. So invoice or an IRN is being cancelled. So in such cases, what will have to be done is a new invoice will have to be issued. Where in cases when the IRN is cancelled or the invoice is cancelled, so in such cases, a new invoice will have to be issued in the books, and a new IRN will have to be generated. So currently that is the process. So for an example, if suppose if you use the invoice number 101, and various other invoices numbers have also been issued 102, 103. So what you can do is probably use 101A, something like that can be used. Uh, so basically, a new invoice will have to be issued in the books, and a new IRN is to be generated in cases where invoice has been cancelled as well as IRN has been cancelled. For everyone's information, IRN can be cancelled within 24 hours from its generation. Uh, so coming to the next, this is quite important for dealers of goods, suppliers having goods. And so what has to be generated first? E-invoice or an e-way bill? So an e-invoice has to be generated first, followed by an e-way bill. However, that is not the case while cancellation is to be done. So when cancellation has to be done, an e-way bill has to be cancelled first, and then an e-invoice has to be cancelled. So that has to be kept in mind. This process has to be kept in mind, that while generation, an e-invoice has to be generated first, and then the e-invoice, then the e-way bill. While cancellation, uh, an e-way bill has to be cancelled first, and then an e-invoice has to be cancelled. So accordingly, for cancellation purpose, what is to be cancelled first, e-invoice or e-way bill? as both e-way bill or e-invoice cannot be cancelled simultaneously. Firstly, e-way bill is to be cancelled, followed by an e-invoice. So these two questions have to be kept in mind by suppliers of goods. Coming to the next question, is it applicable for B2C invoices as well? So this is a very general question where currently the government has brought into picture e-invoicing only for B2B. However, the government had issued invoices, had issued notifications uh, for e-invoicing as well as dynamic QR code for B2C. So all these notifications were issued at the same time. So probably there are various people are thinking that B2B e-invoicing is applicable for B2B as well as B2C. So these are two different notifications, and e-invoicing is into picture only for B2B. For B2C, the government wanted to get into picture uh, the usage of dynamic QR code. So basically, all the suppliers having turnover in excess of 500 crores, the government wanted to get into picture two things: e-invoicing only for B2B and exports, and another thing being usage of dynamic QR code for B2C for supplies made to B2C. However, the second aspect, that is supplies made to dynamic usage of dynamic QR code for supplies made to B2C, has been extended, further extended to 1st December 2020. So it is to be implemented with effect from 1st December 2020. I will be discussing the B2C aspect also in the later stage. Uh, so, is it applicable for B2C invoices as well? No, e-invoice is not applicable for sales made to a registered person to an unregistered person, barring exports. So, what is applicable for a B2C supply? So, when a B2C supply is made, it is necessary to have a dynamic QR code, which, when scanned, can help the customer to make payment through Beam UPI or other payment gateways. So for a B2C supply, only dynamic QR code is applicable. There is no sort of applicability of e-invoicing. So when a B2C supply is made, it is necessary to have a dynamic QR code which, when scanned, can help the customer to make payment through Beam UPI or other payment gateways. This is applicable for all entities having turnover in excess of 500 crores in FY 2017, 18-19 as well as 19-20. So there's a typo there. It's not FY 2019-2020. It should be FY 2017-18 or 18-19 or 19-20. So if I have 500 crores in excess of 500 crores in any of these 3 years, that is when I'll have to use this system of dynamic QR code. However, this implementation has been extended from to 1st December. So these were the important FAQs that I could compile, so which have a practical implication and can be pretty useful. So now coming to the difference between IRP generated QR code and a dynamic QR code on B2C invoices. So as I said, the government earlier on had issued notifications for B2B and B2C. However, the notification for B2B was for e-invoicing, and the notification for B2C was purely for issuing a dynamic QR code. So let's have a look at both these applicabilities. So coming to B2C usage, supplies made by this was also applicable. Supplies made by registered persons having turnover in excess of 500 crores in all the three FIs to unregistered persons. Coming to B2B, this is also applicable by to the same set of people. And the second point being, for B2C, issuance of QR code on the invoice by the above mentioned suppliers. Such a QR code would help the unregistered person to make payment using UPI based payment apps by scanning the QR code. And here in B2B, the suppliers would have to upload the invoice details on IRP, and upon successful validation, obtain an IRN and QR code, as we know the mechanism, similar mechanism. Coming to the third point, in case of B2B, B2C, the supplier was required to have a QR code on his invoice or maybe on his POS machine. So these were the two options given to him. However, in the B2B case, generated by the it has to be generated by the IRP and returned against the e-invoice details reported to the IRP. Coming to B2C, the last point, what is the purpose for getting dynamic QR code into picture? So the whole and sole purpose was to encourage digital payments, and the purpose for introducing e-invoicing, as we all know, was to ensure tax compliance, accountability, and also to provide details to the government on a real-time basis, help eliminate fake credit to an extent. So this was a gist of B2C and B2B. Uh, I'd like to give a clarification of what exactly is static QR code and a dynamic QR code. So a static QR code is such that once you scan a static QR code, so you will have to punch in the amount that you want to pay the supplier. So one, you'll have to punch in the amount, and there is no sort of bifurcation of taxable value or tax amount. There is no reference number. So all, but you'll have to punch in the whole amount, and then then the process will begin. However, the process for a dynamic QR code is completely different. So in a dynamic QR code, once I scan the QR code, all my details are available. The supplier's name is available, his GSTN is available, the taxable amount is available, the GST amount is available, the invoice value is available, the reference number of the payment is available, so it can be tracked. So a dynamic QR code is a very complete process compared to what a compared to what a static QR code is. So this is the difference between a static and a dynamic QR code. Static is not exactly, there is no proper process flow. So here in a dynamic QR code, there is a proper flow, and one can go back to the transaction as in by the reference number and with the name of the supplier. However, there is no name. The name of the supplier doesn't turn up in the static QR code. All that turns up in a static QR code is the account number that you're paying, which is not the case in a dynamic QR code. A dynamic QR code gives you a very wholesome and a holistic picture, unlike a static QR code. So this is what a static and a dynamic QR code is. So now that we know that what is applicable to a B2B and exports, that is e-invoicing, and what is applicable to a B2C, B2C only dynamic QR code is applicable. That too has been deferred till 1st December. So let us have a look at how registration can be done. So people who've not registered and want to register, so we'll have to log into einvoice1.gst.gov.in, and as we can see in the first tab, once we've logged into that site, we can go to the registration aspect and enter our GSTN. Once we enter our GSTN, various details about us come up with regards to the mail ID, the applicant name, so on and so forth. Once we agree with these details, we'll have to click on send OTP, and once we get the OTP, we can verify our GSTN and accordingly set our login credentials, our user ID and password. However, people who are already registered on the e-Waybill portal, they do not need to have a separate login ID for e-invoicing. They can use that particular login ID as well. So that is a plus. So this is a picture about registration. So the government had come up with a relaxation recently on the 30th of September, where basically every invoice with regard this relaxation is with regards to e-invoicing. So every e-invoice that I issue, every invoice that I issue during the month of October, I have a leeway of 30 days. So within these 30 days, I can probably generate the IRN. I can send within these 30 days from the date of invoice, I can send the details to the IRP and then generate the IRN QR code. So this is the leeway that has been provided by the government. However, this leeway is just for the invoices that are being issued during the month of October. So I'll give an example for that. So in case of a registered person, has issued an invoice dated 3rd October 2020 without obtaining IRM, but reports the details of such invoice to the IRP and obtains the IRM of the invoice on or before 2nd November 2020. So as you can see, the invoice's date is during October. So it has a leeway of 30 days. So the supplier can issue the invoice details to the IRP on or before 2nd November. So this is the leeway. Prior to the leeway, on generation of invoice, one had to send the details immediately send the details to the IRP, which is not the case now. So for the month of October, all the invoices during the month of October have a leeway of 30 days, where they can probably send the details of the invoice details to the IRP within 30 days. So this is an official leeway. Accordingly, no penalty would be applicable under Section 122 of the CGST Act. The penalty here is 10,000, or the tax sought to be evaded, whichever is higher. So it is a very hefty penalty. So one has to keep in mind, that e-invoice is generated on a regular basis, and one also has to keep in mind that such a relaxation is only for invoices issued in the month of October. So this is just a 1 month leeway. However, one has to keep in mind that the recipient cannot obtain credit unless and until an e-way bill has e-invoice has been provided. So in terms Section 16(4) of CGST Act lays down the conditions for availment of credit. So one of the condition is having a tax invoice, a proper tax invoice. So accordingly, you know, in this case, having a valid document is necessary. So a valid document in this case would, in an e-invoicing case, would be an e-invoice and not a normal invoice. So that has to be kept in mind, that unless an e-invoice has been issued to a recipient, he cannot avail credit. So a person who is taking advantage of this leeway of 30 days has to ensure that the IRN is generated, and you all don't miss out on generating that IRN. So IRN is generated, and that particular e-invoice is to be sent to the recipient so that he has a valid document to avail credit. Because for availment of credit, only a valid document is necessary. And once e-invoice has come into picture, a valid document is the e-invoice and not the normal invoice. So for suppliers having turnover in excess of 500 crores, and who are to comply with e-invoicing, have to ensure that an e-invoice is given to the recipient, because that e-invoice would be a valid document to avail credit for the recipient. So coming to that point, any invoice issued in violation of Rule 48(4) of the CGST rules would be considered as an invalid invoice, and accordingly the recipient would be ineligible to obtain ITC, as one of the conditions of Section 16(4) would not be fulfilled. So this has to be kept in mind, that an e-invoice, is to be provided to the recipient, and this particular criteria is not done away with. E-invoice should be provided to the recipient. The other clarifications that the government has come up with. So while notification 70 by 2020 central tax, CBIC has notified that e-invoicing would be applicable if the turnover is in excess of 500 crores in any of the last 3 financial years. As I've already mentioned, that in FY 17-18, 18-19, or 19-20, if any of these years the turnover is in excess of 500 crores, that is when e-invoicing would be applicable. So it is not a cumulative condition, it is an or condition which has to be kept in mind. So further, CBIC has also clarified that e-invoicing would be applicable on supplies made by notified registered persons to a registered person, as well as in case of exports. So this was just a clarification that it is applicable for B2B as well as exports. Coming to the last clarification. So, wide notification 71 by 2020 central tax, CBIC has extended the date of applicability of dynamic QR code for B2C supplies made by notified registered persons to 1st December 2020. So, this is a very big relief, as the industry was not ready for having a dynamic QR code. So, this relaxation has been given by the government, and accordingly dynamic QR code can be put on the invoice from invoices issued with effect from 1st December 2020. So these are the three clarifications. uh, Practical issues. So I've had a word with quite some of my friends, who are generating e-invoice. The practical issues that they face are treatment of freight and insurance charges. So freight and insurance charges are usually they are composite supply, and any composite supply attracts the GST rate of a principal supply. So accordingly, what can be done is it can be be a part of the gross value line item, or if suppose it is the freight does not form does not attract GST in some cases maybe. So in such cases, it can be included in the other charges line item. So one has to keep in mind, if GST is applicable, then one can probably put it in the gross value line item, and when GST is not applicable, in such a case, it can be included. Another line item can be added, and that line item is other charges line item, and it can be shown there. It can be reported there. So this is a practical issue that people have recently faced with regards to freight and insurance charges, and with regards to TCS under income tax, uh, there is quite some ambiguity with regards to this. However, what a similar stand can also be taken for TCS under income tax, where it forms a part of the taxable value, then it can be included in the gross value line item. When it doesn't form a part of taxable value, it can be included in the other charges line item. So these are the practical issues basically faced by the industry. As it is relatively new, the practical issues are very relatively new, and the number is not quite high. As days pass, people will face more practical issues, and that is when more solutions can probably come up. So this is it from my side. Thanks a ton. Hope it was worth your time, and it was yeah, a decent lecture. You can contact me at my email ID pawantejwani9@gmail, or probably connect with me on LinkedIn. So yeah, over to you, Deepak sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for such a great session. And now we are moving for question round. Like we have whatever query of the participants.
Correct, yes sir.
Yeah, Sundarji has asked, please can
So
you guide
please,
me?
can you guide me where I can take consolidated list of supplier GST who are applicable to e-invoice generation? As far as I know, ma'am, there are various FAQs available at GST e-invoice1.gst.gov.in, which gives a very concise picture of what sort of suppliers are applicable, who have to generate an e-invoice. So once you go to the site, you can go to the FAQs sector, and that gives a very brief picture as to the applicability as well as non-applicability of e-invoicing, which will solve all your queries. Although I can give you a list, I can give you a gist of what it is. Applicability is specifically for entities having a turnover in excess of 500 crores. However, non-applicability involves quite some businesses like SEZ units, financial institutions, non-financial institutions, banking companies, banks, insurers, goods transport agencies, passenger transportation services, so on and so forth. So, ma'am, this I gave you a gist of the applicability and the non-applicability. However, if you would like to have a look at it, you can probably go to e-invoice.gst.gov.in and go to the FAQ sector, where it gives you a very concise list of the applicability and non-applicability. So there is a validation in e-invoice schema. Total invoice value should be taxable value and the tax amount plus other charges. Validation in e-invoice schema. Total invoice value should be taxable value and tax amount plus other charges. uh, taxable value and tax amount plus other charges. So here basically, if I'm not exactly sure of what Mr. Manoj Jain is saying, so I'll still give a brief picture of what I've understood. So basically, while I'm generating an e-invoice, so I have a gross value where probably in that line item, if suppose I can include everything that would be exigible to GST, and things that are not exigible to GST can be taken in the next line item, that is other charges. So this will give you a brief picture of what is to be put where. So yes, we can move to the next question. So offline tool is showing error that compile module error. How to resolve? So I can give you a brief of how and how the offline tool is used. If you don't mind, can I share my screen, Deepak sir,
Yes,
for
sir.
the offline tool?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, I'll share my screen for the offline tool.
Yes, sir.
So this is the offline tool. So I'll give you a gist of. I'll take an example and generate the JSON. So suppose I'm taking an example of exports. So the supply type code will be whatever the case be. In my case, it is exports without payment of tax. So I'm taking without payment of tax. Reverse charge, no. My document type is a tax invoice. So tax invoice, I can give my document number here, document date. The one point that we need to make sure is that in the buyer GSTN, since it is exports, it has to be URP. So one has to ensure that URP is being put here and not something like nil or URD. So the buyer legal name has to be put, and all the mandatory fields have to be filled. So once the mandatory fields are filled, if it's a service, yes, HSN code, quantity, unit price, gross amount, taxable value. Once all the mandatory fields are filled, I can probably, in that case, I can validate it. Once my data is validated successfully, I can prepare a JSON. So once the data is validated successfully, I can generate the JSON, and once the JSON is generated, I can probably log into the site, and that is when I can get a signed JSON and convert the signed JSON to the PDF, and the PDF can be sent to the recipient. So this is, I gave you a wholesome picture of how the bulk upload tool can be used also. If banking companies provide banking services and other services in same place in same GSTN, how can we segregate? So, sir, in such a case, as I mentioned, the entity has a turnover in excess of 500 crores. However, the banking unit and the trading unit, these two are different units having a different GSTN. So, if they have the same GSTN, sir, so in that case, it shouldn't be a problem. Once they have a different GSTN, that is when the issue comes, and accordingly, you will have to decide basis the turnover whether e-invoicing would be applicable or no. So basis the GSTN, in spite of having the same PAN, if you have different GSTNs, that is when the units are different, trading unit and a banking unit. That is when e-invoicing will be decided.
Okay, sir. Thank you. These are all the questions which we have, and thanks for your coming on History Cafe. तो सर फिर हम इसके एंड करते हैं सर अभी बाकी और तो हो गए हमारे सारे क्वेश्चंस
Sure, sir. No problem.
और ऑल द पार्टिसिपेंट पीपीटी विल बी शेयर्ड ऑन आवर टेलीग्राम चैनल स्टडी कैफे
Okay, sir.
ठीक है ओके सर
Yeah.
थैंक यू
Oh, thank you.